Hello, I am Nazik Hanishian from Horizon Weekly, and today we are privileged to be with the Right Honourable, the Baroness Cox of Queensbury. Baroness Cox, thank you for being with us today.
Armenians, and it's a great privilege to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Baroness Cox has sat under this title in the Lord since 1983. Her humanitarian aid work has taken her on many missions to conflict zones, allowing her to obtain first-hand evidence of the human rights violations and humanitarian needs. Areas traveled include Artsakh, where she has visited over 85 times. In recognition of her work in the international humanitarian and human rights arenas, over the years she has been awarded several times by many countries and international leaders, including the Mihtar Gosh Medal by the President of Armenia, Robert Kocharian, in 2006, as a strong supporter of self-determination of the Armenians of Artsakh. Baroness Cox, you have spent several years investigating the situation in Artsakh firsthand and witnessed the treatment of Armenians in Artsakh, notably between 1992 and 1993. These firsthand experiences have been documented in CSI's published detailed account of the Artsakh War titled Ethnic Cleansing in Progress, War in Nagorno-Karabakh, co-authored with John Eibner. Could you speak more about the injustices you have witnessed?
Thank you. Can I say it was a privilege to be with your people. And although they went through a horrendous time, I always came back humbled by their courage, their graciousness, their generosity. People who had nothing always gave you everything they could. And just their commitment to freedom and faith. And I always say when I speak about Artsakh that the world owes a debt of gratitude to the Armenians for holding that front line of faith and freedom for the rest of the world. But the people of Artsakh paid a horrendous price. I just give one or two examples. I used to be in Stepanakert when Azerbaijan was still dominating and occupying Shushi. And I used to count 400 Grad missiles a day, pounding down on Stepanakert from Shushi. 400 Grad a day. One would destroy a building, and 400 a day. The suffering was horrendous. And women and children were having to live in basements and cellars, often with no light, hardly any fresh air. They wanted warmth in the winter. They had to make it a lot sort of access to a gas pipe. Then, of course, they ran a risk of gas explosions and being burnt alive there. It was horrendous for women and children in Stepanakert. But there was awful atrocities, inexcusable atrocities. I happened to be at the little township of Marahar just after the, well, I think it was a genocide or a massacre, I should say, took place there. It's a village up to the northeast of Artsakh, and the Azeris came and they began by firing tank fire onto the village, and then they came with the infantry and they beheaded so many of the people. And as in Armenia, you bury dead, especially in that kind of climate, very quickly. And we had to ask the local people if they wouldn't mind doing the very, very unhelpful and maybe often inappropriate process of excavating some of the corpses. And I've got photographs I could show the witness of the beheaded and burnt corpses. And the villages, the homes in the villages were still smouldering with heat, and it was a real massacre, brutal slaughter of civilians, a real crime against humanity, a war crime. And you were there to get the evidence of that war crime. Also, we were there when the Grad were coming in towns and cities, and, well, not so many cities on the Stepanakert, but towns and villages. And we were there immediately after the Grad attacks, and homes were burning, and people were mourning their dead. We also were there in the early days when Azerbaijan was carrying out its policy of so-called Operation Ring, when it would surround a village with their infamous Umon blackberries, with helicopter gunships, with tanks. They'd round up the villagers, they would rape the women, they'd kill, if there's a priest there, they'd certainly kill the priest, and they would taunt the people. They'd take their possessions, like a car, and they'd pretend how much they were going to give them. What is it worth, $5? No, it's worth $5. And they'd just taunt the people, humiliate them, and then drive away and take away all their possessions, then drive them off their land with nothing. And I happened to be in Stepanakert at the time when Popurushko, one of the Azeri leaders. I went in there with him. I insisted on visiting Karabakh from Baku. They didn't want me to go, but I insisted. And we were at what was then the Communist Party headquarters. Now, of course, it's your central building. And to the right was what used to be the Parliament building. It was destroyed in the war, so that's no longer there. But when I was sitting in there with Populescu, having this meeting with the Communist Party headquarters, someone gave me a note and said there are many people in the building next door who survived the terrible Operation Ring, and they want to meet you and tell you what happened. So I said in the middle of, well, after about half an hour of this meeting, there are people in the next building whom I need to meet. And I was told, well, you can't go there. And I said, well, I need to go there. They said, you can't. And the whole area was surrounded by barbed wire. So I got up and walked out. And I don't often go through barbed wire fences, but I managed to sort of slither through this barbed wire. And I met the people there in what was then that building. And it was heartbreaking. There was a lady who told me how they took out the tongue of her child. There were just people who'd been so battered and, you know, horrendously tortured and beaten, that there was a man who'd certainly been beaten sterile, where they'd chosen to beat him. The stories are on the record, but it was really ethnic cleansing. Is maybe almost an understatement. It was genocidal, what was carried on there. And there's probably enough examples for the moment, but I'm afraid there are plenty more where those came from.
Absolutely, and it'd certainly be a very horrific and dark part of history there. For decades, you have been advocating for the interest of Artsakh and its people.
Could I just go back?
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
I just remember that not only did the Azeris use the Grad missiles against Stepanakert, they also used low-flying aerial bombardment with huge 500-kilogram bombs with parachutes, so they wouldn't implode on impact. But the parachute would mean that they would explode on impact. And I've got a photograph of a home that was hit by one of those horrendous bombs, with the father of the family, his brother, called in from the front line, just a pile of rubble behind them. And behind that pile of rubble, they couldn't do anything about it, were the pregnant wife and the two little daughters of one of the men in the picture. So used 500-kilogram bombs against civilians. I mean, it was heartbreaking. So I just want to add that, because it wasn't only the Grad, it was the bombardment too.
Absolutely, and thank you for adding that, and certainly depicts the horrific part of that time. For decades, you've been advocating the interests of Artsakh and its people, as well as bringing international attention to the plight of Artsakh and the injustices waged against it by Azerbaijan. In your opinion, why is it important for the world to learn more about the Republic of Artsakh, the plight of its people, and their fundamental human rights of freedom and self-determination?
Well, I think victims of any kind of genocide, ethnic cleansing, their story needs to be known. They need to get the help they need, the recognition that they need, and the justice that they need. Now, as you know, Armenians are wonderfully resourceful, resilient people, and they're rebuilding Artsakh in ways which are very beautiful. I remember the very first buildings in the little town of Lachin, at the beginning of the Lachin corridor, and that had been pulverized in the war in order to free Lachin from the Azeris. And it was pulverized. I remember going through fairly soon afterwards, and this is Armenia for you. The first three buildings they restored from a pile of rubble in the middle of the war with very few resources. First was the church, beautiful little church that welcomes visitors coming to Artsakh as you come up the hill. Secondly, a hospital, and I remember holding up a newborn baby there in my arms at the window, and through the window you could see all the ruins and the rubble, and it was a symbolic picture of new life in the rubble. In the third building, who Armenians chose to rebuild, when all the homes were devastated and everything, only Armenia did this, was the art gallery. And it was a beautiful building with beautiful art. That's Armenia for you. But anyway, so that's one example like of the spirit of Armenia. Now I've forgotten your question.
Why is it important for the world to recognize the freedom and self-determination of Artsakh?
I mean, that's an example of the taking of the team, the cutting off of Artsakh from any outside help. You had to fly in by helicopter under fire. There was no land route. And obviously the people were in dire straits. But having survived all that, And I may say that the stories which the Azerbaijan puts around are absolutely fake news and often the complete alternative or the opposite of the truth. So it's important, secondly, for truth to get out, for the world to know, for justice to be achieved. And as far as the future is concerned, Artsakh deserves its recognition of independence as much as anywhere else. And I've done a lot of work, privilege, to be in East Timor, or Timor-Leste it's now called, and they had a horrendous time in the hands of Indonesia, but they were recognized as having suffered that, and they've got their independence. They're now an independent little land. And resourceful people living in difficult times, but they've got their independence. Similarly, Eritrea got its independence. They suffered a lot, the hands of Ethiopia, and gone through there on the way to Sudan. They are an independent nation. Now, Karabakh, Artsakh, deserves the same recognition. The definition for recognition is to be subjected to attempted genocide. And if one looks at the criteria of genocide, what Azerbaijan did to the Armenians of Artsakh fits almost every single criterion for genocide. And so, A, for the point of view of justice, B, for the point of view of the welfare of the people of Artsakh. I mean, they're amazing people. I always say Armenians don't just survive, you create beauty from the ashes of destruction. And where you've rebuilt in Artsakh, it's beautiful. The amazing new cathedral there. I couldn't believe it last time I was there. Wonderful. But you know, they're smaller homes, and they're homes for those who lost families or who were injured during the war. Very stylish, much more stylish than many sort of social housing aspects in the UK. Beautifully done. And churches restored beautifully. Art galleries, the art gallery in Shushi, beauty from the ashes of destruction. But that's the resourcefulness of the Armenians of Artsakh. That doesn't mean that their suffering is any the less, that they need recognition any the less. They need it politically, so they can stand in their own right, and they're developing very good basic democratic procedures. Their elections are faultless. They're introducing very good policies to do away with gender inequality and so on. It's a very, very good, admirable little land for democracy. So it deserves it for justice, deserves it on its own terms. It deserves it in terms of what it suffered at the hands of Azerbaijan with that attempted ethnic cleansing. So self-determination is a real must for the people of Artsakh, and I think there's no justice in withholding it.
Absolutely. Baroness Cox, you have been a defender of human rights, a prominent educationalist, and an author, and also sometimes referred to the angel of Artsakh. Can you share with us what has been the most rewarding part of this experience for you?
Well, there were so many, agonizing but rewarding, because just to be with people in those horrific situations and to be with them as they kept, as I said earlier, their courage, their generosity, their faith, their humor as well. And so they really went through a hellish experience. But it was a privilege, therefore, just to be with them and to bring back their stories and inspire other people. But I'll never forget just one example of what was typical of this spirit of the people of Artsakh. Bishop, now Archbishop Parker Martirosyan, was in Stepanakert when the shelling was going on. He was with the people when the grad were coming in. And every morning, and it was winter, and there was no electricity, it was bitterly cold, as you can imagine, with no heat, no light. When the shelling started, he would get up to pray. And one day he was in bed and the shelling started, so he got up to pray, pitch dark, freezing cold. A man whose life was actually saved by prayer, because within a minute, his house got a direct hit from grad, and a huge concrete slab fell on the bed where he would have been lying. But anyhow, I met him in the afternoon just to express my sympathy. And there he wasn't expecting an official meeting in the smouldering ruins of his home. And I just asked Bishop as he was then, do you have a message for the world? Because no one knows what's happening here. And, what would you like to tell the world? And I'll never forget, and you can't have prepared this. His first words were, thank you. For we thank God that after 70 years of Soviet communism, we are free to pray again. It's true we're having to pray in the basements and cellars where people are having to hide for their lives. On the front line, where our men are having to defend our people and their lives. And to pray under horrendous pressure, but we are free to pray. And then he went on and challenged to all of us, and it doesn't apply to Artsakh, but it certainly did in those days, but it applies now to many other countries. He said, it's not just those who commit evil who do wrong, but those who know about it and stand by and do nothing to try to avert or prevent it. And that's a challenge to all of us. Then he finished with an amazing message of love. He said, but whatever evil forces are unleashed against us, we have a God of love. And we must always remember, we must never hate. We must always love. We must always love. What a message from a burning home.
Strong message.
Burning Stepanakert at the height of the war. There's so much suffering. A message of love. Thanksgiving, challenge, and love.
Absolutely, and thank you for sharing that. And absolutely, through your courage, your strength, you have, and your generosity, you have given so much to Artsakh. And we thank you for your time. We thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for being with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. With you, it's a privilege to be in Armenia. I love Armenia and your people. And I may just say I'm very worried about recent developments with Azerbaijan now firing across into Armenia again, into villages, and also the build-up on the borders of Artsakh with a huge military build-up. I hope that's something your parliamentarians will be raising with your government. I put
Yes.
our government, but I think it's very worrying and needs a lot of prayer. But anyhow, it's a privilege to be with your people, and an enormous privilege to be with the people of Artsakh. It's one of the greatest blessings of my life, the sad, sad blessing, happier blessing. Now I see families living in a lovely country, but again, much in need of prayer with Azerbaijan still threatening another military solution to the problem of Artsakh.
Absolutely. And we hope that the international community stands up to that and to the freedom and the rights of the people of Artsakh.
Absolutely. So thank you, Armenians.
Thank you, Baroness Cox, and we wish you well, and we wish you health and safety always. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Shatla. Shmurikalitun.
Shunagaluchun.